basis of acceptance, and the, I guess the 28-day free syllabus, most of you know that. We can get a pay reduction if we don't get 100%. And in the specification will tell you what we need to do for forming, false work, stripping, some of the mixtures. So all the information on 502, everybody pretty familiar with that? Okay. Some of these concrete overlay, 510. Everybody know silver cube? Pretty familiar with it? Okay. When it comes to bidding some of these, you can see this concrete class 40 AF. You see our cubic yardage is 0.2. So that's a pretty small quantity. So when it comes to bidding something like this, you know, we put $15,000 in there per yard. That only gives us $3,000. Okay, now this particular item was just a guardrail connection to a parapet. So it's just going to be a simple repair. So when we bid this, we look at it and go, okay, well, what can we do? We can order 0.2 yards. We know we need more concrete than that to test and to get accurate readings when we test the concrete. So we're going to plan on at least 3 yards. So we did just kind of plug in a number. Over here, we ended up being about $1,000. More than likely, if we're actually successful on this, which I think we will be, it'll end up being that we change it to grout and just use some of that pea gravel. So we'll make it a little bit easier. It should be cheaper. But that's something for you guys to help pay attention, project manager as well. This concrete overlay, okay, we did the math, and I think we come up with about 26 cubic yards of what it should be on plans. And so that's a little bit more. Some of that is anticipated to be kind of a full depth removal, because you know the concrete overlay is coming after a hydroblast. For some of you that don't know that, which is down here, the Class A removal and the square yardage. So this one, they do anticipate, like I said, full depth removal. And so then there's a chance that we will hit that number. But I think when it comes to this concrete overlay number, I think we have a better chance of the superintendent and the inspector to be able to make sure we hit the quantities and we potentially go a little bit deeper when we hydroblast. James and Paul McLean, they both worked on this project, and Anthony Fry. So we did, no, so right here, I have highlighted. So 155 yards. This was a project at Mount Home. It was a tough project. We had some serious issues with that bridge, and it was a bad deck. The state was on us a lot for means and methods of working, and what we did, and yet we went over. We did actually down here, the method of measurement. So when it comes to the concrete item, they're gonna measure off of the batch tickets. They're gonna take tickets of how much cubic yards you place. But then down here, okay, that line right there, where it says meat line, so they'll pay 100% up to 10% over. Anything over that, they'll pay 50%. Okay, and that can be a big deal. When we're talking $1,100 per yard, they would only pay us $550. So we did 203 cubic yards. These guys got them to pay us 100% for it. Which I think it's a big deal. So it's pretty important, and I think we'll talk about dealing with inspectors later, but, knowing the specification and I guess how to talk to the inspector and making sure we can do this and we can get paid full price for it. The other thing we kind of run into is in the specification, it calls out that we can only have 6-yard truckloads on silica fume. Anybody ever done it more than that?
Eight.
8 yards?
Yeah.
Okay.
The deck was in good condition.
Yes, and some of these, I mean, I'd say most of them, we drive a concrete truck on the deck and we pour it. And within this specification, it talks about how we're not supposed to do that. And it'll tell us, I guess, the weight, and how we're supposed to read into that, and what size of truck we can put on there.
Hey, Russ?
Yeah.
I just sent you an email. Were you able to get that?
Yeah, that's not mine.
Send it to me.
Okay, so,
Send it to Paul.
how many of you, well, I know that Dustin, okay? He and I worked on a project this past summer that had silica fume. And so, Russ, what was your unit price per yard? Put up your spreadsheet. So as you guys look at that, there's 155.6 cubic yards, and we're at $1,100 a yard. What do you think goes into that price? Like, why did Russ and I and Paul decide to bid that amount? Okay, I'll help you. One is the price of the concrete. You know, I mean, it's you know, we gotta pay for the concrete, and included in that is the concrete. Okay, as he just went through that specification, it tells you what is all included in that bid item. And so it's important for you guys to understand that, and you need to be able to go find what is included within each one of those bid items. Another thing is Fry, how many bridges was that? This is Mountain Home.
Just the one bridge.
Just one bridge.
One for the
Okay, how many setups? 2. Okay, and so Dustin, so guys, remember that 1,100. Okay, did you get the email that I sent to Paul?
No, we're not on the web.
Oh,
You can just
be on
connect to
Wi-Fi.
guests.
You just
It's super easy.
Yeah, so I guess what I emailed them is a pay estimate that we got for the project that Dustin did. And Dustin, how many bridges did you have, you and Joel?
3 with silica fume.
3 with silica fume. How many pours?
6.
5, I think. Couldn't you do Stiebel in 1 pour?
Yes.
And so you actually had 5, so you had 9 pours. Because you had 4 bridges that you did in phases, and then you had Stiebel. Did you get it? And so what do you think would be more expensive? Mountain Home or Dustin's?
Probably Dustin, more setups.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And Dustin, what was it that was a little bit unique? each one of your pours, Joel, how many yards were they? Not including stipple, you did them in phases on the interstate, right? Roughly how many yards were there? They were babies.
Yeah, 9 to
I
12
mean, like
yards.
12 yards. Like I would call Dustin at 7 in the morning and he was just covering it, you know? And so what Jeff said is it took us not as long to set up for Dustin's as it would have Fry's, but it does, you know, per yard, the effort that goes into setting up a pour, it's got to be calculated into that. But something I want to show you that is interesting, so that you guys know what happened. Okay, when I bid this job, it bid about 1 year ago right now, and we had no concrete supplier, none. Burns would not supply to us because they were tied up doing all of those windmills. So their trucks and everything was, they were unavailable. They would not get us concrete. The other suppliers were not comfortable with silica fume, so IMC and Valley. And so my only other option was to get it from Pocatello Ready Mix. We have established a rapport with our suppliers where they trust us. We've got a good reputation, a good history of paying our bills and being fair on how we do things. We live by the golden rule. And so Horrocks gave me what's called a swag number. Boudreaux, what does swag stand for? Scientific wild ass guess of what they were willing to price for concrete. So looking at that, can you see the second line item from the bottom? Yeah, Russ, thanks. Right there. What's my bid price? Double. Exactly double. But my cost of concrete was triple. Their price to supply concrete to me was $900 a yard. And I guarantee you, Joel Ortiz would have been really frustrated with Pocatello Ready Mix. Kelly was pulling his hair out trying to get concrete from them at Aramo, that if Joel was placing concrete 90 miles away, it was going to be really hard. And so, Dustin, who do we end up getting concrete from?
IMC.
IMC. And we got concrete from IMC because we trained them. We went in and we helped them get a mix design. And we ended up paying less than we would have with Burns. So we took on a pretty big risk, but we ended up getting a home run. And I think that, Dustin, you didn't know any of that, did you? Okay. Guys, this is Nick Chapel. Nick, come sit over here by me. Nick is a field engineer that works with Chris and Paul on the Summit project. But look at the bid quantity. How many yards is that? You guys see it? 188. Was that more than Mount Home?
No.
More.
Not really.
Okay, but we ended up, how much did we end up placing, Dustin?
I don't.
Right there, that's the answer. Okay, and so something that we, you know, and it's hard for me to complain, you know, because Joel and Dustin did fabulous. We did not have to grind. I mean, there was a little bit of workmanship issues, but not much. It ended up being really, really good. Really good. And so our margin turned out to be, and we took a bit of a risk, but it ended up being a really, really good deal. But you can see that we left 55 yards on the table. Okay? And so why did that Dustin, you're on the hot seat here, man. Why did they have an original quantity of 188 and we only placed 133?
Well, they wouldn't let me go any deeper with my hydroblast.
Okay. Yeah, and now, the real answer is the 188 is just too high. Has nothing to do with Dustin or with any of you guys. I mean, that's them inflating their number in anticipation that it's going to go higher. Now, very rarely does James Gunkel, who has built the reputation of being the wizard of bridge repair, ever underrun on concrete overdose. And James, how do you do it?
Go deeper every time the inspector walks away.
Okay, now, I wish I didn't hear that. But first of all, we want to be, what he said at first, I think is really the right answer. Because Dustin, you and I know what happened on this job, right? And you're right, they would not let you go deeper. But how much more experience did you have over the inspectors that were out there?
Well, I went through 12 inspectors.
We went through alleging that that's what we want to be sneaky. But if you are going to err, I want you to err on the side of being deeper, because the cost of removing 2 inches of silica fume or of hydroblasting is not that much harder than removing 1.5 inches. And Jeff and Dustin, you and Jeff had common problems. But Jeff, what happened at Rexburg that?
The first half we went shallow, second half we went deeper. It's just our indicators with our rebar. We're hitting rebar shallow, so it's, what controls our depth as we're kind of watching that rebar.
Okay.
And just initially we hit it and kind of ran with it.
And I'm going to defend Jeff, all right? And definitely I'm going to defend Dustin, because I was more involved with Dustin than I was Jeff. But I don't think Jeff did go deep enough. I think that he went as deep as what the contract told him to go. But it's so difficult when you hydroblast, and we do so much of it, that if we don't have really good control of what the depths are, I guarantee you the state doesn't. And so if you're going to err, you want to err, and they give you a variance. The plans themselves say that 1.5 inches is what they want, but you can go plus or minus the maximum aggregate size. You guys have all seen that, right? And if you haven't, those of you that are doing these bridge repairs, you've got to look at that detail really closely, because it gives you a lot of rope. Okay, and as it turns out, me and Dustin argued with the hydroblasters, and we said, we want you to go deep. And what did they do? Didn't go deep enough.
No.
And so then the state comes out, they're streamlining, and all of a sudden things come really obvious to them, and they're like, you didn't go deep enough. Which means that we just left money on the table that we didn't need to. Because Dustin and Joel could have placed 3 cubic yards of concrete just as fast and easy as they could have placed 2. Paul, it looks like you're going to say something.
No, I just was the math guy, but I just did the math on that. We're talking about $122,000, right? The difference. And I was gonna say that when we bid a project, we look at the project in total. So at the very, if we go to bid at the very end, we say, what's our miscellaneous, which you guys are familiar with, and what's the profit on the job? And it's a conglomeration of all these bid items. And so when we leave $122,000 on the table here, that basically, in a way, just comes straight out of miscellaneous. It means we don't have that money to run the project. And so it becomes very difficult when we're leaving that much money on bid items. And so I think this is part part of this training is so that you guys can look at these bid items, look at your spend, where is the money at? And where am I leaving money on the table? And so that you guys can help us out in the field, because we can't always see what's going on in the field. And so at the very end of the project, all of a sudden, oh, we're way less on concrete. Why didn't we put enough down? And that's too late at that point. So that's the hope, that you guys will understand this enough to be able to go to that bid item and follow the money. Because otherwise our miscellaneous just gone real quick, and then we're eating all the profit of the job.
Well, and back with Jeff and Rexburg, so that one, I mean, I felt like we were going deep enough too, because like you said, we're finding rebar, we're measuring, we're checking, we're doing the same means and methods that we've always done with how we're cleaning the deck and using skid steer and everything, so we can check the depth, and you're checking it right behind the hydro blaster often.
Right.
But we don't quite go deep enough, and then you end up spending, was it 2 weeks almost?
Yeah, 2 weeks
Guys
chipping.
and chipping guns. So that's another thing is the cost of the labor and then time. I mean, it's always time and money, always tied together, so.
And it's still Class A, so you don't get Class
Yeah.
B.
Right, still Class A.
We're not getting paid anymore, we're not getting.
But the problem is you're sitting there hydroblasting with the inspectors, and you ask them several times, is it deep enough? Is it deep enough? Do you like it? Do you buying it? And they say, yes, we're good. Then they come back 2 days later and say, we're not deep enough, and this is still Class A, so we're not getting paid for it.
That's
We
when
have
you,
that argument
that's when
constantly.
you go with them, take pictures, make them sign something. Because, Mountain Home, I showed up after hydroblast, they said that the hydroblast was done wrong, and, I mean, I've done a lot of hydroblasts, I know hydroblasts. And it was basically the deck was done. So, in the end, we go to the other side, and me and Jeff, Johnstone, an inspector who's done hydroblast, we take our 2x4, we throw it down, it's 1.5 inches. And that is 1.5 inches below the top surface.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is, the high spot is 1.5 inches low. The low spot is deep.
Yes.
That is within spec because you got the nominal 3/4 of an inch deeper you can go. So we're covered. And I take pictures. And in the end, that side was beautiful, but it was, the other side was because the concrete was horrible. I mean, we're blowing through, chipping through. So you basically gotta say, no, this is how you do it. And you can't take no for an answer. Or you're gonna be jackhammering for days and your guys are gonna look at you like, what happened? Why didn't we do this right?
No, and I tried to get them to sign off on it, and they wouldn't.
See, and that's when you just gotta go to your project manager and say.
But that's also, that's in the specification.
Yeah,
And so that's kind of why we're having this training, is in the spec, it requires that they buy off on that.
The
So
best
if they
thing-
won't do it, they got it.
the best thing to do is just say, hey, show me the specification where they're right. That's all they have to do.
Rusty, oh, perfect, you can go to the 510. Yeah, let's read this. This is a really good example of what we're talking about. All contract bid items, if you look at, can you go back to my estimate, Russ? Yeah, so you see that on the far left where it says concrete overlay, 510. Okay, that 510, that tells you that in the specification, you're gonna find it in the 510 section. And that's where Russ is at right now, is that 510. So you ought to read that. Now, the first problem of it is blah, 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 admixtures and crap that is more related to the concrete supplier. But once you, we also need to look at the 632 spec, which is the hydroblasting, because these all tie together. So it's the Class A deck removal. And I'll shut up and let Russ talk about this, cause I think he knows where I'm getting at, but what Paul just said, what both Pauls just said is 100% true, but.
Yeah, I was gonna try and find the spot that I dealt with this year. Yeah,
Right
so
there.
right here, the engineer will designate a trial area for the contractor to show the equipment personnel methods of operation capable of producing satisfactory results. This one right here, the engineer will set parameters for the removal of the concrete. So we've had a little bit of a battle with this District 3 and with this Mountain Home project, and I went and met with them last week. And I think it's got a happy ending. But this is something that I also said was, where they supposedly said, hey, you guys went too deep on the first phase. I said, well, you guys, whether you like it or not, you set the parameters. You had an inspector there, you were telling us exactly what to do. You know, you could see the depth, we're measuring it with them. They didn't argue that at all. They understood, so, that's part of what you guys are saying. Just making sure they buy off on it, they agree, we're going the right depth. Is that all you want to see?
So before I hydroblast anything, the first thing I do is I read two specs, that spec and 501, or 502, no, 501. 510. And then I go out there. I mean, I only need to read a couple paragraphs. And I know everything I need to know. That is what you use on the inspector, and you gotta get them to sign off. If they don't sign off, then you just say, hey, we gotta figure this out. Because if you start off wrong, you're gonna hate life in the end. And then if you're jackhammering, you don't get paid for it. If you do it right and you're jackhammering, then they pay for it, so.
Interestingly enough, Dustin, I don't know if you remember this, but I knew what our situation was in Austin. That's the job that Dustin's on. And I knew that we had inspectors that didn't know what they were really doing. They were just watchers. But with the resident engineer, I read this spec to him. And I'm like, I'm gonna hold you to this. You're going to designate a trial area, and then we're going to, and I even broke it down to where, hey, our hydroblasters are not magic. Their boots don't tell them how hard or soft the concrete is. And so you've got to tell them, hey, we want to put your machine at a 9, or we're going to put your machine at a 6, or something that they can work with, where they can say, all right, this is going to be our standard. And I think that what Gunkel, when he said that what he does with the inspector, this is when it happens. Is I would rather you, if you think that, all right, it says we got to go to an 1.5 inches plus or minus an inch. I'd rather you live in the 2.5 inch zone than 1.5 inch zone. You know, because if number one, you're probably going to end up having to go back there and jackhammer it. And we're not going to get paid for it. The hydroblaster is now back in Pennsylvania. And number two, we're going to miss out on the concrete overlay that it's going to take us the same amount of time to place anyway. You know, and so, but this is their obligation, and this is where it all begins, and you guys have got to know where to find this. So first of all, does everybody know how to get a hold of the ITD specification so that they can read this? If there's any question.
Well, we can get them on our phone. It's just kind of a pain in the butt looking it up on your phone all the time. It's better if we have the book. I still have my original book. I still use it all the time. It's just need to have the updated one.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to go back and look at.
Looking it up on your phone is a royal pain in the butt, but you can just Google 2023 ITD standard specification, and you can find it. You know, we, of course, if anybody would ask us for it, we would help you get it. You know, I mean, we want you to have that, because we want you to, you know, look ahead. When you know that you're going to hydroblast, look into the future 2 weeks and study those the pay item, what our bid is, what it requires us to do, because this applies to both us, subcontractors, and the state. And James, there's another, I think, an important, well, does anybody have any questions about, this is one that we do a lot, that comes up a lot, and the inspectors don't know this as well as we do, and we always run into trouble with it. Does anybody have any questions or on how to deal with it?
Is epoxy injection material really $1 a gallon?
Yeah, on every contract.
This is the way we did it.
That's an old dude.
Most of our work is in
They pay $50 a gallon for it, so
The fine line you gotta worry about is when you get into rebar. If you start going below 50% of the top of that, that's when you gotta decide, do you want to jackhammer around every piece? And you choose that decision based on the guys that are working for you. If you don't like them, go a little bit deeper so they get it. Then they might, I mean, it's just, that's the biggest thing is the rebar. You don't want to jackhammer every stick of
Well,
rebar.
just cleaning it out at that point.
Yep, and then retying it, and then if it's epoxy, you gotta re-epoxy it, it's.
Okay, that's a good point. So Russ, is there any way that you could pull up your plans for Mount Home?
I don't have one.
Okay, but what, I guess what I was gonna show you is that every contract has a detail, okay? And with that detail, I wanna show this to you, because I think this is important. It's different on every job. Well, I mean, not always.
Wyoming.
it's kind of a catch 22.
Just hold on a second.
He's got it.
So what this detail is going to show you is what it's supposed to look like. And what it's supposed to look like is what Russ and I would have bid off of. Okay, and so when you look at that, it shows you have a 2-inch mean removal depth. You guys see that? Just right to the very right. It's all right, right there. See where D equals 2. And then the variance is equal removal depth 1/2 maximum aggregate size equals 1.5 an inch. So Fry, was the aggregate that you ran into on Mountain Home 1/2 inch?
3/4.
Okay, so is the plan's right or wrong?
Wrong.
Wrong. Okay, now, is that worth fighting over? Maybe. I don't know, but we gotta hold them to the same standard that they gotta hold us. I mean, that's fair. But then when you look at that detail on the left, that tells you the before picture, which is on the right side of it, and then the after picture, which is on the left side. And so looking or thinking about what Paul just said, should we be hydroblasting into rebar?
No.
I don't know, I think so. Existing deck reinforcement, the shadowed, the hatched areas, where it says Class A,
It's just right.
it's right there.
Right.
It's right there.
And
But
that
then-
deck was bad enough, it went around every piece of rebar.
And Russ is good enough that he's brought that to their attention and said, hey, this is how we would have bid it based upon what you showed us. By the way, your aggregate's bigger, and then this is actually what happened. But it's really important for you guys to see that and understand how to read it so that you can talk intelligently with the inspector, but also so that as you're hydroblasting, go look for a rock. And it says the maximum. Find the biggest rock.
That American Falls one that Harold did had 1.5 inch rocks in it.
Oh, there's some 3-inch rocks in
You
there.
can always find big rocks.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what it says, right? But what ITD's gonna say is gonna say, oh, well, Jeff, I mean, you just picked out an outlier, you know, and, okay, well, we can work with that. It gives us something to work from with the state. And those are gold nuggets to the project manager to go to the state to negotiate and work out these differences. So, Russ, do you have anything to add to that?
Not on this one.
Okay,
I'd just say that one thing the states, if they're trying to get a really thin overlay, they're really kicking themselves in the butt. Cause at the end of the day, when we say we're going deeper, what it means is we're cranking up the hydro blaster a little bit. We're being a little more aggressive on the deck, and we're removing spalls, and so it's actually better for them to have a really good thick overlay. That way you lay it down the road and not have to replace it. So all this stuff we're talking about is actually beneficial to them, they just don't know.
We're catching the class B as we go.
You're catching a little bit of class B, and they're not gonna have to chain drag, and they're not gonna miss spots. We're actually giving them a better product at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that's another Gunkel principle, that when we bid these projects and we know that he's going to be on it, he doesn't do very much Class B. And so if I'm bidding that, what do you think we do?
Get rid of the class B.
We do not put a lot of money in Class B because we'll never get paid for it.
Yeah.
Because Gunkel's giving it to him for free in Class A. And so we'll then, I won't say unbalance our bid, but that's kind of what we do.
So I've got a question on that project. In the end, basically the state decided that anything under the top mat, they weren't gonna sound.
Well, they raised the top rate instead of 1/2 inch, they went up 1 inch on the whole curve too.
Well, but that literally destroyed our class B bid out.
We don't put a lot of money.
Yeah, this,
Was there any, I didn't look at that, I didn't see it.
Because they said that, you want to.
Well, that's what he's saying, that's what Curtis is saying, is we expect to get all the class B. with
Exactly, but I mean, there was, that deck was falling apart. I believe there's chunks.
They were trying to save their own ass on the set.
And some of the arguments-
Heat makes them better, instead of going 1.5 inches, they were like 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, and they raised the whole rate up 1 inch.
Yeah.
That's how they got their 2.5.
and this one worked out good. I mean, I think we handled it extremely well. But you can see the Class B square yard is 174. Jeff, do you remember what it was in Rexburg?
For the square yard of concrete?
How many did you remove? What it was supposed to be? Because I think it was like 200 and something. So that deck was smaller in Rexburg. And it looked like a better deck to begin with. I think they didn't know what they had when they bid.
Oh, that bridge was added on after the.
Yeah, we
contract,
went over,
It was bumped.
but you can see the way we bid,
Yeah, what is-
according to what we think is gonna be.
But
Yeah.
this is what we're hoping you guys can help us with, is when you guys have your contract, you can look at class B and see what we did. And say,
Yeah,
oh,
see
they
on
only have
this one-
$5,000 in there, do we wanna remove class B?
Yeah.
We probably don't, and so that's kind of the things you guys gotta look at and help us out with. See how we bid it and see whether there's enough money in there to.
The biggest thing is, I've been doing this for,
This one, talk about kind of unbalancing bid. You see what we did with traffic control maintenance.
$100.
$1,750, $1.
yeah,
So that,
cause we assume there's not gonna be any maintenance on it, cause it's just.
Probably 'cause you're doing it,
but there is gonna be some maintenance.
you're gonna be doing it.
Okay, and this is like Paul was just saying right here, is we come down here, this is our mobilization column, different subs, different things that we paid for. Traffic control maintenance, we put $70,000 in there.
So we get it at the end no matter what.
So we'll get it, but we also anticipate, I think we figure we're around 1,200 hours is probably what we would have. So this is the kind of thing that we do ask you guys to help us out too, because this should bring up a red flag to you and go, hey, why did you guys bid like that? That was stupid of you. But it's not. What we're trying to do is we're gonna minimize the traffic
check traffic patrol in the morning, check traffic patrol at night, you're getting paid for that, right? That's why you like that,
But if we were to bid it dollar for dollar, I think road work ahead was $72. Okay, I think that's $127,000. So that increases our bid by $60,000. So that's the potential that we would lose the project if we're $50,000 higher. That's why we did it that way. And I would say we're doing a good job, so. What is that? This is District 4, Twin Falls area.
So right in Gunkel and Fry's front yard.
So that-
And you guys are going to Whitebird, Idaho. Isn't that how that works, James?
One other thing I want to touch on. Okay, you guys know special provisions.
And just one, before we just leave this, one last thing. First of all, I'm not done going to work on ITD on that 55 yards. Their record keeping is pathetic. They're just not very good. And Paul's gonna talk about daily reports, and that's gonna become really, because I think they've missed a couple of pours. So it's not as bad as what it may look like. You don't think it's that bad, Dustin, do you? I mean, does that surprise you? Okay, but what happens, Dustin, at the end of every pour? You know what I'm getting at. Okay, so you see that drum rattling?
Oh,
What does the ITD do?
Truck's empty.
They go to the truck driver and ask him how much is left in the truck.
Okay, but what is the tough part of that?
Arguing with them that
Well, the tough part is trying to see into the future. As you are pouring, you're like, oh man, I got one more truck to pour. Do I have 6 yards or 3 yards?
Yeah.
What if it was supposed to be 5 and you ordered 4? It sucks for everybody, including the state. So the state wants you to order more until then, when it's all done, then what do they want to do?
they wanted to not pay you for the yardage you ordered.
And so what do they go and do?
They talk to the truck driver.
They talk to that truck driver, and you wish the truck driver didn't speak English.
Yes.
You know, and so we always tell our ready mix guys, you tell that truck driver he only talks to my guy. That's it. So Russ and Paul and Chris and I, that's what we do. But Gunkel, you're really good at this. What do you do to make sure that don't happen?
Get to the inspector before he goes to the truck, so it's empty.
The truck driver should know there's only a wheelbarrow left.
Okay.
If you have a rattle, it's under yours, so it's empty.
Well, what's another thing, Paul, that you think you do?
And I think these guys do that, they just don't know what they're trying to get at, but before the last load, and we've talked about this. what
Do a
you guys
cleanup
do?
load.
You
Always do a
talk to the
cleanup load.
inspector and you say, hey, I think we need 4 yards, what do you think?
Right.
And once he gets buy-in on how much to get on that cleanup load, and say, hey, Katie, that's what we're gonna get paid for, right? And a lot of times they'll agree to that, right?
Yeah,
And so you make the decision together, so then, at the end of the day, who cares what's in the truck? Because you guys have already made the decision on quality, right?
That's exactly right. You make them appreciate how tough it is. Because it's not a neat line pour. You know, I mean, it's not full table smooth. And so you go to them and say, guys, every truck we have poured, we have yielded 14 feet. And now I got 26 feet to go. And I gotta let them know 3 trucks in advance. So now you can see the level of suck here. You know, so you help me out. Then the decision's made, they will understand why you over-ordered, and they won't even ask the truck driver. That's what you want. And then, at the end of the day, you write in your daily reports, ordered or placed 62 cubic yards agreed to by Alexis, or by Scott, or whoever. You know, and then it's done. Then that gives me the ammunition to go to them and say, hey guys, you haven't paid me 50 yards, and as I add up these numbers, I think we're there. All right.
So last couple of things for specifications, for all of these without an S in front of them are just in the standard specifications, either the 2018 or what's coming out in 23. Down here where it has an S in front of it, that's a special provision. So those are gonna be what we call the pinks. The contractor generally gives you pink sheets. You just need to make sure that you can go to those and check and see what it is. I mean, we'd have to scroll through a ways to find those particular specials, but this is just the special things for that particular project. And as you saw there, I mean, it's really pretty simple stuff. There's some railroad work on this one. He's doing epoxy overlay over railroad bridge, and then purple traffic signals. Doing things in phases, we'll have several sets of traffic signals, and so that's just gonna give you information on what those two things are about. Any questions on specifications or?
Let me say one thing on that. So if there's a special provision, that means that that special provision overrides everything in the standard spec.
Doesn't it override the plans too?
No, it wouldn't override the plans, but for that item, whatever's in the pinks, that's what you have to live by. Now you have to be careful because sometimes the pinks will direct you back to the standard spec. But when you read that, so if you see a special provision, you say, I just gotta go to the pinks, I've gotta read it, and it might take me back to the 502 spec, it might take you back to the spec.
No, I thought that was the whole reason for the things to override the.
That's exactly what it does. But sometimes though.
You shouldn't have to go back to the book.
Well, if you read the pink, sometimes it'll say, hey, you've got a test per this, and then you know that the testing section of the standard spec is applicable to that. But that's kind of exactly what you said, it completely overrides what's in the standard spec.
The other, and there are some things that, Russ, can you go, just things are popping in my head, go to your mountain home project? Because sometimes there's limitations of operations. And if you can't, I can remember it pretty well, but the special provisions include those S items, but it also sometimes includes other limits of operation, traffic control requirements.
We got a lot of that changed on that contract too.
Okay, well, when I bid it, I'll show you guys what we did when we bid it. Some, you guys might think, man, you guys are nuts. But I think one of the things that makes us successful is that we know our guys and we know how good our guys are. But we also know we have experience in knowing how things normally work out. And there was this ramp that was to this bridge that these guys did this overlay on. And there was like an insane amount of rental if we were late on it. They only gave us a very short amount of time. And
I think it was 25 days, 25 calendars.
Right there you're at. So it's important for you guys to go up just a little bit, Russ. Right there where it says work restrictions. That is all in the special provisions. Anything that has an S in front of it stands for special, which also stands for pink sheets. But they don't always have a number. Sometimes they'll just put things in here that are unusual. And the way that I bid this is I just like, we're gonna be late. That is unconstructible. There is no way that we're gonna make that on time. And so I pumped our bid with some damages, knowing that we're gonna pay them. And Russ, just through his crafty reading of the semantics on that, he got that changed.
Open for 2 days.
Whatever I don't remember what he did. And I read it myself, and I'm not sure I agree with him. But
Open it up.
For a day, close it back down.
right? I mean, I don't know, Russ, explain to everybody what you did there.
So there was a couple of things that had to happen on this one. First of all, we had to do jacking. We had to jack and put the bearing pads underneath the girders. We had to do that before we could hydroblast. And so we jacked it, there were some change orders there, it Yeah. So, also prior to the pre-construction meeting, I went over and met with the state and said, you guys are crazy, we gotta do something different. And I proposed a couple of changes to the traffic control, and, they didn't bite off on either of them, but at least I had a meeting, we discussed it, and then, they did say, yeah, if you can open it up in between, we'll work with you guys. And so I think they held their word up, I mean, they worked with us. And, I think the first phase, we were like 70 days. And that was just the bad debt. The second phase, I think we were 29 days. So I think we did pretty good there. All in all, I think it worked out. I think we shoot for a higher percentage for a profit margin. And I think we're gonna be around the 10, maybe 11%. Which on that project, I think is pretty stellar. So I think, Brian McLean and James did a great job. And what they did there.
And so, I guess the point is with the specifications, make sure you understand that. You know, there was a project that we did a couple years ago where we didn't. And ITD, from their perspective, they were charging me $12,800 a day, every day. And we didn't know that that was happening. And then I had to go in and fight them on it after the fact, and we prevailed. But if we would have been more proactive to begin with, I never would have had to fight for it. And that's what Russ did. And if they had held us to those days, I think it's, you see 24 consecutive calendar days, and then it says 25 working days. So they contradict themselves. You know, and those are just little nuggets that we can lean on to try to negotiate and put us in a better spot. But we bid some money in there because we knew that either way, we're gonna be paying some damages for those lane rentals. So, know what the special provisions are, know how to read a specification book, how to tie those numbers with us, and then use it. You know, so every day, think, what am I gonna do 2 weeks from now? And read that specification so you understand it. We're pretty well on schedule. If you guys wanna go use the bathroom, or, you know, Paul's got to talk about scheduling and then, daily reports, so just be back in 5 minutes.
That's actually what it means. But in this industry, we just use them both synonymous. We can call our schedule or CPM. And the state requires that we have a CPM, and we have to do it in Microsoft Project. And right now, that's their requirement. And so the schedule you have in front of you, that's typically what you guys will see. When I print out a PDF from Microsoft Project, that's what it is. Okay, we're going to kind of go through what's on that. First of all, I know there's a lot of people in here that are there's others here that this might be the first time they're actually looking at this type of schedule. So some of this stuff's going to be really basic, some of it will get into more detail, just so everybody can understand. But the basics of a schedule is it's basically just a list of tasks required to complete the whole project. So this one here, you see it starts with item 28. There's actually a page before this and then 4 pages after. And so that's how many pages and how many activities it takes to finish this project. It also is like the dependencies between the tasks. So does this task have to finish before this one can start, or can they be done at the same time? And that's what parallel and series means. So if an activity runs in parallel, it means I can be working on 2 activities at the same time, and they don't really interact with each other. If they're in series, it means I've got to do one before the other. So for example, for series, I've got to form an abutment and put rebar in there before I can pour it. And so that means that they're in series. I can't pour it while I'm doing that. But I might be able to work on some road work, you know, excavating or removing road at the same time that I'm forming an abutment. So you do those 2 things in parallel. home, we might say parallel or series or these activities. Now, there's also a duration, so that's the estimated amount of time that that one activity is going to take, okay, to complete. So those are some of the main things on the CPO. Critical path. What's the critical path? Who knows what that is?
Roadway,
Or what?
roadway traffic.
Could be.
The path we do to get the job done.
Yeah, so it's the longest path. So when I put all these activities in a schedule, and we line them up, and then I say, this one has to be done before this one, and then this one, and this one, when I look at all those different paths, and that's what Microsoft Project does, is it looks at all those and it says, this is your longest path, and it gives you a completion date. And so, in the specs, we receive either you've got to finish on this date, or you have this number of days to complete it. When we look at the critical path in the schedule, that tells us what it spits out, and that has to align with the requirements of the spec. So that's why the schedule is a good tool for us, not just a requirement from the state. Let me see how I can do this at the end. I'm gonna skip that for now, we'll come back. So this is the schedule you have before you, okay? So I wanted to just kind of go through this so that when you guys have this in your trucks, you're able to kind of read it. So the first thing is that across the top is there's a bunch of rows and a bunch of columns. That's how the schedule's set up. The first one on the far left is just an ID, and that's given to that's Microsoft Project just assigns it an ID. Okay, this starts on 28 because it's the second page. But if you were to go to the first page, the first activity would be number 1, and it's just sequential. Now, something that's not really beneficial with Microsoft Project is if I add an activity in here, if I need to add one, if I miss it, and I add it in the middle of here, it shifts everything down. And it puts that activity in. And so all these would get a new number. And so when we send you a copy of the schedule, we need to make sure we're working off the same copy so that we can speak to the same activity. Does that make sense? So when I update the schedule, which we're supposed to do every month, it's gonna be a new one, so we've got to get you a new copy of that. And if you are not receiving those from the PMs, you need to ask for them, so that you guys have those copies, so that you guys can understand where the schedule's at that time. So that's just a sequential thing. So the next one is this little information, is what that is, a little I. And these are the 3 common ones that you might see there. So the first one is just a check mark. And that just means that that activity is 100% complete. We've finished it. And so when I update the schedule, I'll go put that activity, I'll put a start date and a finish date. It'll put a check mark there and say that it's 100%. And so when this project is completely done, that whole column will have all check marks. The last schedule will be all check marks, and we submit that to the state. Okay? Okay. You might see that symbol there. This is actually one that you don't really want to see, but you guys might see this. It's a constraint date. Okay, now the way that the schedule works is all the activities flow with each other. So if I put a completion date on an activity and it's later than I anticipated, it'll push all the other activities below it sequentially in the dates. If I have a constraint date, that means that it's not going to flow with the schedule. That's saying that activity has to be done on that date. Does that make sense? And so it won't flow with the schedule. The only time you really should see this on there is if there's an activity that's required by the spec, like you have to relocate the utilities on this date. Then we'll put this constraint on there, or if there's something in the spec that says that. Otherwise, that activity is not really going to flow with the schedule. So, the last one you might see on our schedules is this little symbol, and that means there's a unique calendar. And what that means is, when I set up Microsoft Project, there's a calendar behind the project, which means we're going to work 5 days a week for 8 hours a day.
And this whole schedule is based on that, which means Saturdays and Sundays, you're not gonna see them included on here. You're never gonna see a date that's for Saturday or Sunday.
If you do a change order, is that gonna be the same symbol for a change order?
No,
No.
no, this is just in Microsoft Project, it'll just have that. And it just means that, so on this one, the reason that there's a unique calendar is because as you can see that activity, it says cure abutment. And so cure can happen through the weekend, right? Well, all the schedule's not through the weekend, and so that's a unique calendar because that activity's you're gonna see a Saturday and Sunday if it goes through the weekend.
So it doesn't push the rest.
Yeah. Does that make sense? Any questions on those?
So the change order puts, if you gotta put a change order down, does it push everything down?
Okay, so if, I think what you're asking is if there's a change order and I've got to add activities.
Right.
Okay, so I add activities in the middle of here, it's gonna still flow with the schedule now, because I'm gonna go put in some logic that ties it together. And all this, these will get new numbers down below. That's the only thing about the ID, is it'll have a new number. And so when I call you, and I'm like, hey, James, if you look at activity 40, you know, if you're looking at the wrong schedule, it might be different. And so that's just something to be aware of. And our schedules are pretty small, and so usually we can figure that out, and it's not that big a deal. Okay, the next thing is just the task name. Now, you'll see some of them in bold here. Okay, the bold ones are just headers, at least on my schedules. I don't know if these guys do that. But on mine, it's a header, and when we get over to these predecessor successors, you can see these are blank. Which means that it's not really tied in the schedule, they're just headers so that I can distinguish, this is stage 1, this is the bridge demo and excavation. But really, this is just a list of tasks for this whole project. And it's just describing what it is. Now, we just talked about the specification, we talked about bid items. Okay, so there's a lot of different bid items. What we try to do is make sure that for the most part, we have an activity that lines up with those bid items. And the reason we do that is because then, once it's complete, like remove guardrail. You see that one right there, 36? Remove guardrail. Once that has a check mark right here and it's complete, that means I should get paid for some guardrail, right? And so that kind of is also a trigger to the state and to us that we should get paid for that. And so these should line up, there's extra activities we have to put in, like forming is not a bid item, but it goes with concrete. But when we pour concrete, that'll be in there, it's a bid item. Okay, any questions on that? That's pretty simple, straightforward stuff. The duration. So that's just how many days is it gonna take to do that activity. So this is Bigwood River, remove the bridge deck. You see we have 8 days. A lot of times when we build these schedules, if I know who the superintendent is, I like to call him and ask him about specific things, sometimes say, how long do you think it's gonna take? If I call James on this, he'd say 16 days. He'd say 16 days. And so what I do is I just cut everything you guys say in half.
And then they get mad when we don't get it done.
Exactly, so that's how it works. Okay. No, but I will tell you this, so we talked about the critical path, right? And so if I ask James and he says 16 days, and I put 16 days in there.
Speaking of,
Which I would.
Is that bridge done yet?
Yeah, except for you gotta put a 4-inch cap on something. But anyways, I would put 16 days in there for him, because he asked for it. And then I'd go down the whole project and I'd put all those durations in. And then I'd look at my end date, and guess what? We'd be 2 months past. And then, that's the fun part, is we have to go back to these activities and say, okay, do we need to put more man on it, more equipment? What can we do to reduce these durations so that we can bring it up into line with when I have to finish? And that's when I go to James and I'm like, you're crazy that it's gonna take 16 days. I think you can do it in 8, and here's how, and we talk about it. That's ideally what we would do. Sometimes we don't know who the superintendent is at the time, and so we kind of just have to use our best guesses in that. And then that's when you guys get mad at us because you don't think it's right. But, any questions on durations? Do you get that, kind of how that works? All right. Predecessors and successors. So, these are how the relationship between the activities. When we talked about parallel and series, that's where this is done. So you can see all these numbers in here, and these numbers tie into these IDs, if that makes sense. So there's an activity, number 7, up above, that is required, and when I say predecessor, that means that that has to happen prior to this activity being done. So, for example, this one has just a number, right? So it's what's called a finish to start, which means that activity number 19 has to finish before I can do number 30. Okay, so this is activity 30 is fabricate 3-tube rail. So you guys don't have 19 because I didn't give you page 1. But any ideas what 19 probably is up above? What I got here is?
Set rail.
Shock rounds. So this is approval from the state that the shock round. So we don't want the company to fabricate the tube rail until the shock rounds are approved by the state. So number 19 would be approval of the shock rounds. And then once that's done, they can start fabricating the tube rail. Does that make sense? And so for our example before, a finish to start relationship would be I've got to form the abutment before I can pour it. That's a finish to start. Does that make sense? Okay, you might see this one too, an SS after it. And that means start to start. That means that activity 34 can start at the same time as activity 35. So they'll run at the same time. And if you look over here, you'll see these dates. These are the start dates. They're exactly the same on these two activities. So that's what the SS means, is it's a different relationship between those two activities. Now you'll also see that that one has a 3 right there too. So that has 2 different activities that are tied to it, which means both of those. So that means that number 3 has to be done before activity 35, and 34 and 35 will start at the same time. That's what that means. So when you're looking at your schedules, you can kind of understand how that is. Finish to finish, just the opposite of start to start. It means those 2 activities are going to finish on the same day. There's other ones. I'm not going to go into any more detail on those because there's other like lags and stuff, but we try not to use more complicated connections, but that's the basic ones for the predecessors and successors. Now this column here was successors. That if I put an activity here in the predecessor column, it automatically adds it to the successor on that other activity, right? So you could really just look at one of these columns. You don't have to look at both of them, if that makes sense. Does everybody get that? Any questions on that? Okay, that's called schedule logic. That's the logic of the schedule. So
You guys start with the template, or you add everything?
So the first schedule I ever put together was from scratch, but now when I start a project, I'll look at another project that's similar.
Copy and paste.
And I'll copy that one and put it in, and then just start going from
So
there.
you don't miss something.
Yes, we don't miss it. And that's a very good point, because ideally what we do is put this schedule together, shoot it off to you guys so you can review it. And you can also have buy-in on the durations, have buy-in on the ties. Say, and I know, like with some of you, I've called you and said, hey, look at the string on this one. We gotta take some days out of it. How do we do it? And you guys gotta be able to read this to know what I'm talking about. So you have to understand the predecessors and successors. So you can go to this activity, remove guardrail, and then go, the successor adds 37 SS, so go down to here, remove bridge deck, okay? Then I'm gonna go to 38, and you can walk yourself down the schedule and see what that string is, if that makes sense. Start to finish is just that, this is the dates that I was telling you about, that if I'm late on this one, and I put a finish date of the 26th, all these activities below it that are tied to it are gonna push. Okay, but this is the start and finish date of the schedule. So these are the dates that you guys can be looking at. So if I was a superintendent and I was planning my next week's work, I would grab the schedule and I would look at all the start dates. And I would go, what dates fall within next week? And look at every activity that goes for the next week so that I can plan ahead. And then you might go, oh man, I didn't even realize down here at the bottom of the schedule that I'm supposed to be doing this in parallel with this other work that I'm doing. That's the type of stuff that this is powerful for. Because you can look at those start dates and you can plan your week. I don't know if you guys do that. Does anybody do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know. Everybody.
We only look at these things when you ask us to update them, man.
Yeah. Okay.
Every once in a while it's there in your
Yeah.
plans, but yeah.
Okay, so that's the start and finish date. I'm gonna skip over this for a minute, these other ones. Percent complete is exactly what it is. And that's what percent complete that activity is. So, you remember the check mark off to the left, you can see that one. That's 100% right here. So that activity's done, puts a check mark there. If it can be 50% done, whatever. And so
say we have a late finish date, but we had extra guys to
you're
not
jumping
push
ahead.
it.
Just we're jumping ahead, but we'll get to that. Okay. So before we get to that, I want to talk about, and there's this one right here, which is total slack, also known as float. Okay. In Microsoft Project, they call it total slack, which is weird, but most people know it as float. And what this means is, we talked about critical path. Okay, so this activity right here, 7 days. Which means if I were to delay that activity 7 days, it would then become critical path. Right now, it's not critical path. Okay? 7 days off. The one below it's 14 days off of critical path. These right here, all these 0 days, what does that mean?
Critical path.
That's critical path. There's no float at all. No days of float. Okay? So now we'll go back to these that kind of Paul was jumping into. So, early start, early finish, for the most part, is going to line up with start to finish. That's just the earliest you can start that based on the logic, okay? Late start, late finish is a calculation of the float. So there's 7 days of float here, right? So you can see 6-9. If you were to start this on 6-20, that's the latest you can start it before it becomes critical path. So as Paul, I think, now ask your question, Paul.
So say it's one that doesn't have any slack. Say we finish it late, but we got everything else done behind it. Can you adjust it so it doesn't change anything is what I'm asking.
Yeah, so that's a good question.
Say we got extra guys to do two things at once.
Yeah, so if I have and it's possible to do an activity below before the other one,
Yeah.
and you finish it, hopefully the schedule's not set up that way because that means it would be parallel. But sometimes we complete activities 100% down here. The logic will stop there and start right there. So anything above that won't push the schedule. Any other questions on that? That was a good question. Gantt chart, and you'll see that on the right side. This is just basically a picture just to show you kind of in the picture form what the schedule's doing. And as you notice right here, critical path is red. And so that's an easy way to look to the right of your schedule and understand what critical path is. There's also these lines that tie all these activities together, which can get really messy, and sometimes it's really hard to read, just to be honest. But this is called a Gantt chart. This activity here, see the one with 14 days? This activity you can see is running in parallel with this one, right? Because they're both running on the same dates. This one and this one you can see are in series. It's like a waterfall because they can't be done, they're not running at the same time. And then these black ones are those headers I was telling you about, and they just roll up anything below. So that's a Gantt chart. That's on the right-hand side of your schedule that you have. Down at the bottom here on your schedule, you'll notice we gained some float right here. Okay, and this turns blue and it's not showing critical. So this one has 5 days, and that's just another example of activities that aren't on critical path, but they're kind of in parallel. So I kind of debated whether to talk about this, but I will, because you guys are gonna be reading the schedule, but if we put a calendar in, this is a Microsoft project thing that's kind of annoying, okay? If I put a calendar in that runs over the weekend, then for some reason, because that's different than the project calendar, it thinks I gained a day. That makes sense? It thinks that I'm working Saturday, so all of a sudden I gain a day of flow. It's not real. And so this activity over here, right here, that came off critical path, it's actually still on critical path. It just, and so that's one thing with this critical path in red. It's not always gonna be red. You just have to understand, you have to be able to read down and go, oh, I gained a flow here. It's a little bit annoying, and I wish that they wouldn't use Microsoft Project for that reason. But I put it in here just so you guys can kind of understand, because I know that someone's gonna come in and go, well, it's not on critical path, I have a day of flow. Well, really it is critical path, you just have to understand it. So, I know that's annoying, but that's what it is. And then at the bottom, there's just a legend for the Gantt chart that'll help you understand if you wanna look into that further. So, that's the CPM. Are there any questions on that layout or anything to do with all that? You guys got it 100%?
So, my next question is, yours and Russ's and Curtis's, are they pretty much the same?
They're very, very
Because
similar.
in 14 years, I've only used these on 2 projects, and that's yours.
They are the same. They are the same.
Yeah, I'm flying why they have what they call a 3-week look ahead, which is.
Yeah, that's a unique one. You're right.
Yeah, so it's like this, but it changes a bit.
So that's a good question, because what Kelly's referring to is the state sometimes requires us to do like a 6-week look ahead or a 3-week look ahead.
Yeah.
And in some projects, it's easier just to do a side schedule to show that, or a list of tasks or something like that. But for the most part, the requirement is Microsoft Project, which means they're going to look like this. Now, does Russ put headers like I do? I don't know.
But I mean, it's
I don't
basic,
know.
it's the same template.
But everything's gonna be the same. That's why I printed one out, because this is what you will see. And if we use this as a tool, then, and then we update it, and here's the requirements. I'll just go into this. So, where am I at? So the ITV standard requires us to update it every month. So I'm supposed to update the schedule every month. Do I do that? Depends on the project. But I'm
You should
supposed to.
update it daily, so we don't forget.
I'm supposed to.
Don't they, hold your draw if you don't have.
They can. They can hold the pay if I don't submit a schedule that's updated. Okay? And we'll get into this in daily reports, but that's where it becomes important to me to be able to know what dates we did stuff so that I can update the schedule. Otherwise, it becomes a pain. Okay? So they help us understand the project progress. And so when I update that schedule monthly, and then it does all the logic below, I might update the schedule and all of a sudden it pushes me past the end date. And that's when I'm coming to you guys going, holy cow, what are we gonna do? How are we gonna bring this back into
Can you show that, like, through the project, being past critical path, I mean, you have to bring that in every time?
For the most part, we need to bring that back to show that it's on time. I mean, there's rare situations where we just can't do it, and then we gotta go to the state and say, there's no way. But for the most part, we've gotta do the best that we can to put more resources on it, to work different items at the same time, in parallel, or whatever we can do to bring that back up to date. And the other part of that is we don't wanna pay LDs. And that's typically what that means, right? So like we just said, it allows us to look at critical path. So the critical path on the project, when I do the first schedule is called a baseline schedule. and that's gonna have my critical path. Well, as the project develops, as you guys know, things change a little bit. Well, the Flying Y is a good example.
Yeah.
That project's huge, right? And it has a lot of moving pieces. And Kelly's working on one thing over here, and we got dirt guys working over here. And at some point, Kelly might get ahead a little bit, and then all of a sudden the critical path changes to dirt work. But then the dirt work guys might catch up a little bit, and then it switches back to that. The only way to know that is by the CPM. And so, if I come to Kelly on that project and say, Kelly, we're on critical path. That means something, because that means we're on the hook. We don't have any float in our schedule. So we've got to perform. We got to get it done. And we hopefully would get ahead so that we jump off critical path, so all the eyes come off of us, right? But when you guys are on your projects, for the most part, there's a sole superintendent, and so you guys got to understand where to put your manpower. And this can help you do that if it's complicated enough. I know you guys, for the most part, can look at your project and go, this is critical path, and understand it. Sometimes this can really help you with that. It can also help us analyze delays, and that has to do with critical path. If we're behind, we got to look at the critical path, look at the activities within that series, and then start getting creative on how we're going to pick up time. You guys are good at that. You guys know, I mean, I've worked with a lot of you, and we figured out ways to come to you and say, how can we do this? And you guys are usually pretty good and say, hey, if we do this, or we have to work this Saturday, we might be able to gain a day to be able to bring us back. Or if I had this piece of equipment, I can do it quicker. Or, etc., we might be able to work 2 activities at once if I had another crew, and that'll help us down the road.
One of the things, Paul, that I'm just kind of thinking of things that have happened to me this summer. Dustin, I've given you a CPM, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Dustin had my CPM, and I probably forgot that he had it. You know, I mean, we didn't talk about it every day. But as we're working on the Osgood project, how did you feel about our schedule?
I felt pretty good about it.
Baloney. I remember you're just like, man, I can't sleep at night because I'm so nervous about our schedule. Do you remember? I mean, you were telling me that, hey, we're way behind. We're way behind. And when we developed the schedule, in order to be entitled to additional contract time, if you have overruns, what does the overrun have to be? I don't know if that's a really good question, but on the CPM, what does it have to show up as? Critical. Right? I mean, it has to be on the critical path. So Paul McBride was the longest pole in the tent. You know, and I, you know, and we know, based upon experience, we know what, on bridge repairs, what often overruns?
Patch and repair.
Patch and repair, that's a big one. Paving, does paving overrun ever? Not really. And it's a small item, doesn't take much time. But what was the golden nugget that we found?
Patch and repair.
Patch and repair? No, there was another one.
Oh, crack injection.
We did crack press. And it was supposed to be 500 feet. And Joel, how many feet of crack press did you do?
The roads are like, what,
Yeah, about a mile. Like really, it was almost a mile. And Joel and his Peruvian buddies did all of that. And so I knew that I was in the driver's seat on time, you know, but I hadn't told Dustin that. You know, so Dustin was just sweating bullets because he could look at the schedule and he could see, man, I got to pour stibble in a week and I haven't even hydroblasted, or, you know, I mean, so he was really stressed. So what do you think I did? Nothing, I just let him worry about it. No, we were able to I was like, hey, listen, we're gonna be okay on time, I've got a plan. And so what I should have done is I should have had him involved in the plan earlier on. And that was my bad. I did the right thing by giving him the CPM so that he could look, you guys should be able to determine critical path. You should know that because you should, look for those opportunities because time is always a big deal. On a job that Harold and Nick were doing, and then Travis was on that job too, ITV was threatening to charge us how many days of LDs, Harold? I mean, just money-wise. $1 million. Really, it was $1 million of lane rentals. And we were able just to get it to go away, all because of the CPM. And we were entitled to it. It's not like they gave us something that we weren't owed, but all because of paper is what got us to get those days back. And the same thing with Dustin. If I hadn't had that crack prep on critical path, we would have been out of time. And so for you guys to have these charts, and hopefully to involve you more in that. So when that, I think after that bullet is about.
Yeah, and I added another one kind of to exactly what he was talking about. It's called the TIA, the Time Impact Analysis. And so when there's a change, said what happens when we put that in, push it in. Well, yeah, it pushed the date, but we have to use those schedules for an analysis to show the state how much time they should give us for that change order. And so all we do is we just take the schedule and we say the end date is substantial completion is this date. And then I put an activity in and I add those change orders and I put how long it's going to take. And that automatically pushes the end date. And the difference between those two dates, I can go to the state and say this is how it's impacting us.
And does the state ever give you the time for the change orders?
Privilege of walking across the lawn to work and being called Dad, and I treasure that privilege. I want to tell you a little bit about your hesitate to call him the boss, but your friend Curtis. First of all, his mother dealt with Curtis on two calls, I remember, from teachers. One, when he was a sophomore, the teacher called and was quite frantic because Curtis was not in school. And Kurt's mother calmed her down and said, well, what's the issue? And she said, well, we're being tested today and our school is being scored. And we need Curtis in here to take the test because he's going to help the overall grade. And then another call I remember had a student-teacher conference, and Curtis had slept a little bit on this particular class, and his mother expressed concern, and the teacher said, hey, you don't need to worry about Curtis. His strength is not in taking tests and that kind of stuff. His test is in dealing with people. Curtis is going to be okay. And I think it's turned out that that's right. And then the other thing, before I start talking about safety, Curtis' mom and I have 4 boys, but it turns out that we have a much larger family than that. brothers and sister. And, we finally got a girl, that's it. But I want you to know that from my perspective, you are Curtis's brother, and I appreciate that. Arturo, I see you, and I can tell you that Curtis loves you. You're probably not as good as Curtis thinks you are. Now, guys, what do we mean when we say a company has a culture of safety? This is where you talk. What does it mean if Cannon Builders has a culture of safety? Mel, start us off. What does that mean?
In my mind, that would mean that no matter what you do, you think of safety before everything else. How do we accomplish this safely?
Thank you. More.
What we live by.
Creating a habit.
What we live by.
Say it louder.
It's what we live by.
Okay. Well, we got Jeff. Have a good one.
Creating a habit.
A habit. Okay, now, you guys are the leaders of the safety effort. James, other people call you Gunkel, but you're James to me. What? There's something that you do that I really appreciate. What is it?
Asking the crew if they have any concerns or questions.
That's right. James is very, very religious about that. And I think that's very important. Cannon Builders never want people to do things that they're not feeling good about. If you ask your crew, do you feel safe? We never want to put workers in a position where they feel like they are being unsafe. Now, what is it, more? Jake? Now, just a minute, Jake, before you talk, I want to tell you what to talk about. Jake is an example of something that is very important to Cannon Builders. And I'm not asking it very well, but make me look good. What is Jake an example of that he's done that is very important?
He became certified.
Certification, training,
Jake made the decision that he was going to better himself. And John Tidmore did too. They made the decision that they were going to become better. And guys, that's another, in relation to safety and in relation to things in general, we want to engender in this organization that we're going to become better. And I congratulate you gentlemen for doing that. And from my perspective, that's very important, and we hope that you develop a culture determining you're going to become better. And more importantly, that you let your workers know that we want you to improve. We want you to improve in safety. We want you to improve. Now, what are, to get specific about safety, I've got some paper here that I think is probably the most important paper that you would fill out. What is it?
Weekly safety report.
James, I'm sorry.
Weekly safety report.
No.
Job hazard analysis.
Job hazard analysis. hazards on this job, and how can I protect those that I love from getting hurt because of that hazard? And you are the most experienced guys on the crew. You are the ones that should have a handle on that and zero in on it. And, Ryan, what does it mean to keep it current?
As you go throughout the project and you finish things and start new things, you gotta add to it. You know, like trying to pile, or trying to sheet pile or extract them, or, you know, removing the bridge, same girders. It's hard to put all that down there when you just start, because you're not, you know, some of these projects go so long, you're not thinking that far ahead. But as you're going through, just add to it.
Thank you, Ryan. Guys, very, very important in terms of safety, to know what the hazards are, and to know how you're gonna deal with it. And make that a part of your training, and make that a part of your culture, that you're going to protect your workers from those hazards. And, in a training a few weeks ago, I directed that when you start a project, equally important to know how deep you dig or what the parameters of the job are, equally important to know what the hazards are. And write those hazards down and indicate what you're going to do to mitigate those hazards, and indicate on your report what you're doing to deal with the hazards. And then, every week, reassess and keep dancing with your project and reassessing what you're going to do to deal with the ongoing hazards. And, guys, you would be amazed at how much time my son Curtis spends on the phone. It's just a lot. And some of the calls are not real pleasant. Most of them are, but it would make his life a lot easier. Hi, Mark. Mark, yeah! It would make his life a lot easier if you gave him ammunition. For example, on safety, it helps a lot if a worker gets pinched, that he gets his finger under a girder, or he gets his finger between two jersey rails. It helps a lot if we can go to the report and say, hey, he was trained on that. It's unfortunate that it happened, but doggone it, he was trained on that. And guys, it's all he said, we said, unless you have it written down. So, in terms of these reports, be faithful and be very diligent. My wife and I, we often talk about this little business, and our main concern is everybody okay? Are your workers being safe, and are they being protected, and they're doing what they need to do to be safe? And guys, I can assure you that Cannon Builders wants to be safe. Cannon Builders, we do not want to be reading about our workers on. We want you to be safe. And we do love you. And we really, really appreciate you. Thank you. Do you have any, Curtis, I deserve a lunch now? It's not hard to bump up the average of black in high school.
He made me work.
Where was it?
Turtle. Should have been there. I was at the office working.
So,
You were close.
we need to talk a little bit about EEO. And so every year, we've got every 6 months, we're required to review that. And so, all of you should have been through some EEO training. And so, can you tell me can somebody tell me what an EEO policy is? Yeah. So what is that? What is our, I don't have a policy with me, but I can tell you just the principles that I live by, what it is. Somebody's gonna say something?
Can't discriminate.
Yeah, we can't discriminate. Now, I'm gonna tell you that my dad and I had a meeting last week out at the shop, and I told Logan and his guys that I'm gonna start discriminating. You know, I told them, so we'll get to that here in a little bit, but, that's probably not a really good way to start an EEO. But the discriminating is that as I get people that come in and try to get hired, this is a good example, is that if they don't speak English, I'm going to discriminate against them versus people that do, or this people. Because I think it creates issues against our mission statement. Our mission statement being we want to do things safe. If we can't communicate with people, it's unsafe. We gotta do things right. If we can't communicate, our quality suffers, and we gotta do things fast. And so we just spread the word. But I also, as Logan and Ethan and Sonny and I looked around the room, when John and Jake were there were more people that spoke Spanish than what spoke English. And there were very few, other than like Jose, that spoke both. And so the question would be, well, what if all these guys left? Well, they just walked out the door. We'd be in a world of hurt. And those guys are super, super important to us, really important. And so Noel, you guys know Noel in the back. He's teaching an English class for us twice a week. And I remember when I met Arturo for the first time, and Arturo and I, how many years ago was that? 10? 11. That we spoke Spanish. He and I, we spoke Spanish together. And he doesn't speak Spanish to me anymore. He's English. And right now Arturo is building a bridge in Rupert. He's the man. And he doesn't speak Spanish to me because he speaks English better than I speak Spanish. And I can remember Joel Ortiz. I always spoke to him in Spanish. I don't speak to him in Spanish anymore. And those guys learned English. So it can happen. So we're trying to help the guys learn English. So that's how I'm discriminating. I don't know if that's the right way to say that. But I think that the thing that Chris and Russ and Paul and Nick and I have confidence in is that our people are good character people. Now it is impossible for me to get through a year without an employee calling me, telling me how much they hate Kelly or Jeff. And when I get those calls, I love them. Do you know why?
Because we're doing our job.
Because Jeff and Kelly, if I asked Jeff Stringer to go to Atlanta and steal the Coca-Cola recipe, he'd have it by noon. He just is doing whatever to get the job done right. But I also know that he's not going to be disrespectful. That he's not going to put us in a situation where, you can expect excellence out of people, but you can't demean them, or undermine them or discriminate against them. And so that in a nutshell is our policy. But sure.
Yes.
Do you guys all, Quincy, who is, I think she's going to be out in a little bit, but she is our EEO officer. She doesn't necessarily have to do the EEO training. She normally does, but she is your first. We want to tell the employees, as you guys train on EEO, and we give every employee the EEO policy
when they start working, they gotta sign it, right?
Yeah, this is out on new hire pattern.
This is out of the new hire act.
What is wrong with the screen?
Okay, and so, they have it, and they'll acknowledge that they received it. So we expect that they live by it. And then we expect that we will hold ourselves to these standards. If one of your employees feels like they've been discriminated against, they're gonna go to you, and then you go to Quincy, and then Quincy will, we've got a process to make sure that we look into the situation. If they, and you need to tell your employees, if they feel like you're the one that's discriminating, you're the one that's the problem, then they'll go to, directly to Quincy, because obviously they're not gonna feel comfortable going to you. So make sure that they all know that when you do the training with your employees. And all of you do this periodically, and it provides their, the EO officer can go just Quincy Shelley. Just to tell you, and I've told this story 1,000 times, but, there was an employee that was a superintendent of ours, and he was working out on a bridge, and it wasn't much different than a lot of the projects that we have now, where on his job there was the Galvan brothers. What were their names, Kelly? Marco and Luis. Luis, right?
Luis, yeah.
Remember them? Marcos and Luis. I think you were out there too, Joel. It was in Jackson Hole, and Eric Waters.
Oh, yeah.
Eric Waters. And so we had probably 6 guys, and every one of them, their last name ended in a Z. Okay, so they're all Hispanic, right? So we're not discriminating against anybody, right? But somebody who I didn't even know was of a different nationality accused Eric Waters of saying something to him. Okay? And what Eric Waters said is he said, like if I'm talking to Nick, only, I gotta make sure I say this right, only a goon would set that trailer up like you did. So it wasn't the right thing to say, I probably shouldn't have said that, but that employee heard something completely different. And what Eric said could easily be interpreted as something that was racial. So that guy, he went after YDOT and after us. But the YDOT, I've told this story before. Do you remember what the YDOT guy did about Eric Waters? He just said that guy would never say what he accused him of saying. I've never even heard him use bad language, let alone ever say something like that. Case closed, done, over. So that's what we want. That's in a real life example of equal employment. Any questions about that? Okay. The food is right over here. Let's eat now. If you need to take a break, and then come back. And then as we eat, Chris is we're going to go over. We're just going to go over the projects that we have, each one of us. But Chris and Kelly and Paul, they've got this big dog flying wide project, and so they're going to take a little bit of time of introducing that. And then, but we'll just do it while we eat.
And you understand this type of stuff, you guys can help us even more to be able to see this. It's kind of a different level of superintendent to be able to help us out with time impact analysis, with being creative and going, hey, I can see that patch and repair is on a critical path. I gotta get more patch and repair, or just, that's kind of an example, of just kind of looking at that and understanding it. And then also being able to look at the CPM and look for opportunities to make up time. Those are huge things for us that help the project.
And we get weather days if we work half a day and go home too.
Yep, that's exactly right.
And James, I think your question, it's a pretty good point, because the CPM is a tool for both the state and for the contractor. Theoretically, You know, and I didn't feel like this when they were charging me $1 million in LDs, but theoretically, we're on the same team. We both signed the contract, you know, and so this CPM is for us both to be able to have a plan. And the Flying Y, their CPM chart would cover that entire wall. I mean, it's enormous. And there's so many moving parts in that one change could change the whole critical path, or it could change, which means changes the approach that the contractor goes about doing the bridge or the work. So we may say, man, it would benefit us to pivot, not work on this bridge, and now we're gonna go work on this bridge. You know, and you can use that CPM to help you make better decisions. And so that's why these change orders and this time needs to be added in real time so that those decisions can be made.
You guys have any more questions on CPMs? You think you understand them? So my hope would be that, we never have a perfect CPM. I mean, there's always little things that, sometimes like on U-Stick, there's activities I didn't even have in there, because I didn't even foresee them. You know, and my hope would be that you guys, when you get a project, you understand the CPM and you can go down and if there's activities missing, or there's a constraint date on an activity that shouldn't be, or different things like that, and you guys understand it enough that you can call me, say, hey, why do you have this way? Why is this like this? And that way we can work together. That's what I would hope. I don't know that I've ever received a call like that, but that's honestly, I think, where we need to get, so that we're to the next level of running these projects and understanding them. And all this CPM, what it equals at the end of the day is money. It equals being efficient, getting the critical path done, so that we don't have LDs, and so we can make the most money possible from the project. Questions, we good? If there's no questions, then that was perfect.
It's perfect.
We ask questions while you're doing this, like.
That's good. That's good. We go straight to anything else?
Well, Leslie, did you get my text message?
Mm-hmm.
Could you pull that up?
You want me to show it on my, up there?
Yeah, so we're just gonna show a little video, and there's somebody in the room that took this video, and it was of a hunting event, okay, and I'm included, okay, this could be me. All right, so I want you to watch the video, and then I want you guys to see who you think it is, and then it's very possible that it's me. Oh, you don't have it?
That's why she got an email.
Hold on, it's taking me a minute to look on my Facebook page to find the video. Hey, Ethan, can you help me on my Facebook page find this video?
It's not something you have to stick to. It's just a good fix, so you have to update everything you're doing, so if you do a project done while you're not listening, and then
deck up. If I get it wet, his deck, Curtis's deck. It's still not done. Yeah. I'll have to work on the roof. You know, you should come over and help you on Saturdays, I think. You don't want to work on Saturdays. Not me. Joe. This is when I work. I know, I have trouble getting him to work.
Hey, I'm struggling to find it on my Facebook page, so we'll find it here in a minute. Just because Ethan's standing here next to us does not mean that he's the one. He's just an expert on technology. Yeah, so we've got, Paul's gonna do, he's gonna do some training on some daily reports. And then we're gonna do a quick recap of projects while we're eating lunch. And then Joe's gonna talk a little bit about safety. But I think lunch is supposed to be here about an hour, so we'll start with data reports.
You gonna fix that?
I might do that.
Alright.
Alright guys, sorry to be quiet. Daily reports. I didn't pass out a daily report because I think there's most of these now, but they look like. I wanted to use six daily reports as an example. That's just wrong. That's the daily report. That's pretty much what they look like.
It's in the job.
Pretty good.
It's in my job.
That's the daily report.
You can't have my home.
Alright, this is our daily report for, I know it's
I'll bring the gun.
pretty close to this, and there's a little bit of variation in other ones, but we're just gonna go through kind of the same thing, let's go through the sections and talk about it. And while we're going through this, I don't wanna get into a ton of discussion, but if there's any issues you guys see with this, or ways that it could be better, maybe just let us know, and we can mark that down and maybe convert that, because eventually, we would hope to go to electronic on these, and that would be some of the ideas that we could incorporate into that, so. For the most part, on all the data reports I looked at, for the people that I had, and there's some examples in here, and just so you know, I just picked some out of people that I've worked with, superintendents, and I'm sure other people have good data reports too, I just didn't have access to them, but for the ones that I have and looked at, you guys would be pretty good at filling out this part. The weather, the maximum and minimum temperatures, that's kind of hit or miss. Like sometimes people put them in, sometimes they don't. I think where that benefits us is a lot of times when we're doing concrete or things that are that have weather requirements or temperature requirements, that's a good thing to put in. So I think it's a good habit to get in to put the weather down. And if it rains, obviously we put that. Prime contractor workforce. Okay. One thing I will say is on these daily reports, there's sometimes I think you guys probably are like, oh, just fill these out because it's something I have to do. But there's a lot of information that us as project managers use off of these daily reports. And sometimes it's filling out force accounts. And so having the guy's names, the days they worked, what trades they worked, how many hours they worked, that helps us quite a bit when we're filling out the force account. It helps out with time cards sometimes, just be able to refer back to this. So filling these out is pretty important. So here's some examples, I just put them up here, of some pretty good, they're filled out pretty good, so they would help us. Some of you guys might recognize your handwriting. No, I think that's made before. But you can see this one, they just work different carpenter, labor, and masons, so they split it out this way. I think that's great. And have the hours there. So that's some good examples. Any questions on that section? I think it's pretty self-explanatory. So major equipment on the project. So, this is really a hit or miss one. And I don't know if it's just because you guys feel like, man, it's just every day, I gotta write down all the equipment I have, I don't know. And maybe with electronic that'll help, because it's always gonna be in there. But this one, like I said, it's probably, from what I saw, it filled out 25% of the time. And so, but it is, so the columns obviously is the equipment over here, the hours operated is pretty important for force account for us. And then the meter, I think Leslie's gonna go over a program that we're starting with the equipment, so that kind of might go away. Same with the service. All right, so we would, not that you guys would fill those out anyways, but I don't know if we're gonna have to fill them out.
On this here, like say, the crane, it's set in the yard, it has been used. Can we just write in it?
You can just leave it blank.
Okay, if it's in our yard, but on the job. As long as it's not being used, we don't need to. Just to say it's here.
Might just circle it. Yeah, I just, so that we know where it's at.
Paul, if you'd submit a daily report with just your name on it, that would be, Hey, I actually got daily reports from him for the past 3 weeks.
Yeah, I'll tell you this, at first I was giving Paul crap, and then I went back to look at all my jobs and daily reports, and I found quite a few from Paul. I thought he wasn't capable of doing it. Then I remember he did it all through Northgate, and I forget. And then
It depends on how much work you got and how much time you even have to do. I mean, believe it or not, that's the last thing you think of.
Yeah,
And the job is more important to me than a daily report.
And I did that, but I will tell you that they're probably more important than you realize. And also, the state on a lot of projects requires to be submitted.
That's in the specification.
Yeah, and all this stuff that's on the daily report was derived from the specs requirements. And so that's why it's on here, it's not just to do the task. But here's some that were filled out. I think that's exactly how it should be done. You can see the meter and the service already filled out. But hopefully that's taken care of in another thing. So
It's not, I got a low doll, it's not 1,200 hours.
So what I mean is, Leslie, am I right, in that your new program talks about service and meter? So hopefully, what I'm saying is, on the daily report, this might become obsolete, because we have another program we'll talk about that will take care of that. We'll get to your complaints later. Okay, subcontractors and inspection and testing. This, I would say, is filled out, from what I saw, 10% of the time. It's not really filled out that often. I struggled to find examples of this, and I realized that maybe there weren't subcontractors on the job at that time, or inspections, but this can be really beneficial when we're looking at issues on the project. If there's traffic control issues, was the sub there? Did they inspect the project at that time? We could look at, here's a couple. I think they're from the same person. I can't remember who this was. Mine was Jeff, on 12th Street. But
Yeah, it looks like it.
got your hand right, Jeff?
Yep.
Jeff filled these out, he told us who was there. Then he also has Robert, which is from the city of Idaho Falls,
Yeah.
was on site.
The inspector.
He's their inspector. Stratus on site. Right here, he has, testing of the roadways passed. Just stuff like that is great information for us to have. Okay, this section here, I would say you guys fill this section out the best of all, which I think is probably one of the most important sections. And so, that's good. But I'm gonna go over, I'm gonna try to capture all this, and you guys help me as well. But there's certain things that if you guys would put in here, would help us significantly, okay? I joked with Paul about not getting daily reports on U-Stick, and I'm gonna keep doing it, because, so right now, I have some when did we finish that job?
When did we start your job? 4 days after we started.
Yeah.
That's when we started that.
So August, so now we're gonna start February, January, February. And I have not completed my final CPM. It's not turned in. I have, I think, 2 or 3 force accounts that I haven't turned in. And honestly, the reason is because I just don't have the information. And I know I'm hammering on it, but this is real. This is what it does, is I'm trying to get dates and stuff, and the state, have you guys ever seen the state inspector's data reports?
Yes.
50 times.
They have probably 8 hours more a day than you guys do to write them, because they just sit in their trucks.
And that's all they do is.
That's all they do is write them, but they're so detailed, and so when we have an issue, we try to go back to them. They always have this data report that's perfect, and if I don't have any back, that's why we set it ours. The other thing is that I can pull dates off of here for schedules, for some.
Now, are you about to look at the inspector's dailies?
I can ask for them, and I have done that in the past, asked for the daily reports, and they've sent me copies of them. And so, and you'd be surprised what they write in there. And we're gonna talk later about,
Definite 5 times.
we're gonna talk later about, talking to the inspectors and stuff. But you guys, your eyes would be open if you read their daily reports of what they put in there, the stuff that you said. So, just remember that. So, here's some examples. So on the top, I really like this one because they put in the we drove pile. How long were the pile? What was the cutoff lengths? That's all on there. And so, if we ever when we get paid for the pile, I can verify that we got paid for what we drove. And when we get paid for cutoff, I can verify that. And as you can see, the handwriting's amazing. Those are 2, what's down below, I think.
And wait a second, the handwriting's amazing, mine's or Dustin's, cause
I can read them both. One's a little harder than the other one, but I like it on this one here. See this? Traffic control checked at this time, and everything was in place and in order. We've had projects that have had accidents on the project, and one unfortunately was a fatality. And then no check back, you guys don't even know. Because if there's an accident that's bad enough, they're going to come after Cannon Builders, they're gonna try to sue us. And it's very important, notes like that can be the difference between whether or not we win or lose that. Something that simple. So stuff like that is very important.
Is this Dustin?
Oh, right.
That's Ryan.
You can't always say it was good, you gotta say it fixed something once.
Yeah, it is.
I see you work, you don't have time to, do you do this at home after work?
Paul, I put these up for you.
There's no way. Okay, you can do this and still work.
Here's a
Now
number.
that is beautiful.
The one on the bottom. I dug deep.
We were making some dailies with Paul.
I can't believe it.
So up here, what's right here? I love this.
Force account.
So, Jeff, so if he's writing this on there, he understands the specs. And he understands the work that's in the spec. And he understood that this is outside of it. James Gunkel does this too. And they highlight it for me. And it says force account. This is how many men worked on it. This is the equipment I used. This is how long I used it. To fill out a force account sheet from that is easy. I can have that done in a minute. Okay? He even put notes down here about why we have force account. So I have backup for it. And a lot of you guys do that. The other one and Paul's here is pretty good at this, is when I have to update the CPM, it's really nice to know when we start things and when we end things. And so, and then you guys, this is probably the one that you guys do pretty good at, but then you'll miss something. Like, it'll go, forming abutment. I started to form the abutment. Forming, and then we'll miss a few days, and sometime in that, we finished it and we poured it, recorded here. But if you guys, if you understand the CPMs and you understand the logic, then for you guys to just make a note here to say, hey, we finished abutment number 1, forming, or rebar, or we poured it, and here's how many cubic yards, and there are some that do that. And that helps significantly when I'm updating the CPM when these guys are. We can just go in there, quickly update it, and then we have those dates. If we go on memory, what happens is I update the CPM, I send it into the state, what's the state say? You didn't pour on that date.
Their dailies are perfect.
Because my daily's perfect, and you guys poured on this, and we get those comments. And so that's why that helps us with putting those in there. That's just another good example. Of course, it's Ryan again. Those are amazing.
Everybody loves Ryan.
Ryan is perfect. No, but he has traffic control there. He has Blaine brought in loads of riprap. Right, that's what that says. 8 loads of riprap. It has the quantities on there. It's just, it makes it really easy for us to go back. So, some of the main things we use this for is updating our schedule, force account information, claims. If the state comes after us for whatever reason, we have backup on it. What else, guys? Help me with more information you'd like to see on dailies in the sections.
Well, subcontractors are always nice, you know, Dustin, we always, sometimes you don't, I mean, we will involve you with subcontractor issues, but we had a mill on one of our jobs that we needed a customer work on. And he showed up late, and he was unhappy because there was some water issues with the state, you know, and having those type of notes in there can provide us a reminder, to go back and look at that. But, you know, so subcontractors and issues that come with those subcontractors.
Russ?
I guess this is just a concern, but making sure that we're not writing something down that's gonna hurt us in the end as well. And I think we'll talk about that when we talk about inspectors, with, how we talk to them, no different than how we write things down. I mean, it's good to know that something breaks down or is tacked out, but I think it can, you know, it's,
You can say it broke down without putting it in standard.
yeah, if it's too much information, then it can hurt us.
That's a great point, man, because we can get access to their daily reports, and I shouldn't be reluctant to give them ours. Matter of fact, I shouldn't want to, you know, but I don't want anybody to, I don't know, my kids use the term cast shade, you know what that means? I know Ryan doesn't, but, you know, to cast shade on subcontract, on ourselves, our employees, you know, just be professional in how you do it. Cause we may end up turning those over to ITD before. I've had no problem with Kelly Kofetz, you know, I just, here they are, you know, and on Aramo we had to, and Kelly did it electronically, you know, so.
And Curtis and I were in mitigation, and Ryan's daily reports, we had to give those over. And so I don't know if you guys know that, but this daily report could go, I mean, you don't know who's gonna see it. If we end up in court, this could be up on the screen just like this, in front of a room of people, so.
And also, I mean, we're not, you know, you need to understand who the audience is, but don't be dishonest, you know. Well, what do you notice that ITD inspectors do all the time now? It actually really bugs me. They're all taking pictures, you know, always taking pictures. And sometimes they're taking pictures of things that they should stop and help somebody rather. It's like they take a picture of somebody with a broken leg rather than helping the person, you know, with the broken leg. But you know that, you know, you can't be dishonest. You gotta be honest in what you put. I also think with those pictures, Paul, I've asked McLean and Gunkel and Dustin, they've done really, and Ryan, the guys that I've worked with, I think that it's so easy now with your phone, it's just every day, send me 2 pictures. And Nick did that really good at Rockland, because then that's, if Paul had 2 pictures every day at USTIC, it'd be a lot easier to update your CPM, because you just go to the date and see what's going on, and that's really easy to do. Not in place of the data report, but in addition to the data report.
Could you set up Google Drive for every job?
Yeah.
That way we don't.
Yeah, unless they can do those things.
Cause going through other emails.
Yeah, and that would be really good.
Even daily reports on Google Drive.
Because when you text them, you got name
Yeah.
themselves and
Yes.
Leslie, did you?
Well, I was just, are they supposed to be marking like work comp injuries on those daily reports?
Doing what?
Work comp injuries, like when somebody gets hurt, are they supposed to mark it on their dailies?
So I've seen it, yeah. And so
Because sometimes we have to go back and look at
if
dailies
there's
to,
an injury or
yeah.
something, I think we, yeah, that.
And the way that you get them to us, we'll take them however you can get them to us, but what I like is, like Paul and James and Dust, all of them, have just been emailing them to me, and some of them will take pictures of it and email it at the end of the week, or scan it in. I don't know how you do it, Paul, but it's pretty slick.
That'll be scanned.
And then what's nice is I just copy and paste that in a folder that I put daily reports. So I can go in on Dustin's job and put any day, and I can find a daily report, that he'd sent me electronically.
I think the consistency of getting them at least every week helps. However it is, whether it's, I think if you're gonna get hard copies done, you need to keep a copy of it for yourself.
How long do you gotta keep them?
8 years. Have you been in my office? It's like taxes.
It just gets scratched.
He just gets scratched.
He just gets scratched. So Paul, can you put an email that I just sent you? I don't know if this is a good time, but sometimes you get force accounts. And one of the things that I've always tried to stay clear of force account is because it's just more paperwork, and I don't need more paperwork. But sometimes it's unavoidable. There's no way to, we gotta do force account. The other reason I'm not a fan of force account is I always worry that that the state will represent them better than my guy will represent me. And there are times that force account is so much and so big that you can't keep it on a daily report. So this is what Dustin did for me this past summer, and it just makes it really, really clean, and it wasn't on a daily report. You say just get another notepad and just give me the labor, the equipment, and the material. Now, with force account, that's how we submit it by labor. But if you just put, 6 hours equipment operator, does that help me? A little bit, but I'd rather it say 6 hours Travis Walker. Because I have to take that and put that on that force account sheet that the state requires. And so this was just, I don't know if this is actually a force account, it's a quantity sheet, but it was definitely useful information that, I didn't send you the right thing, but this is a good one, because what this helps me with is I can go back and reconcile these quantities that ITD is not very good at keeping track of, and then once we get to the end of the job, we're counting pennies, and it can get really messy. having something like this is really, really nice. But Dustin kept good track of force account. Kelly, to tell you a story about Aramo. At the beginning of the project, Aramo's contract schedule was out of whack. What ITD was asking us to do was not safe. It was requiring us to put traffic in a crossover situation prior to spring. So right in the middle of winter. And so we proposed an acceleration change order. And that acceleration change order, I don't know, just making up numbers, was like $100,000 for labor and overtime. And they denied it. But I said, all right, well then the alternative is on the back end of the project, we're going to have to heat our deck. We're gonna have to do heat and cover, and you're gonna have to pay for that. And Kelly's force account was so good that at the end, they paid more in heat and cover than they would have for our acceleration. And that's where he represented us better than what the state did them. And it worked out in our favor big time. So that's the daily reports help us for time entitlement, but also for these quantities and for force account.
All right, that's it. Any suggestions on the daily reports? What do you find difficult with them? Put a C on there, or?
Sometimes there's not enough space for the amount of tree that you have.
Yeah.
So you have to fill out 2 sheets or try to write it on the back.
Yeah, I noticed that, and I think some of you, I saw St. Paul, where you had so many men, they had to put 2 or 3 rows and take up all the.
It would be nice if the equipment and stuff was on a different page, so you have all that room for the end of it.
And I think when we work on this electronic daily report, it might be able to.
Yeah, something that you can do is I wouldn't care to get 2 daily reports for one day. But like if that happened, just page 1, and if the page 1 only has 20 or 10 spots for labor, go to page 2 and do a continuation. You can do that. Once you see what Leslie has done, you guys are gonna be pretty impressed. And that's some point we may get to an electronic version of a daily report, but until then, this is where we're at. But the thing is you just, for the most part, we're pretty good at it. But even those that are good, you can be better. But some just don't take it as serious as what, and it becomes a big deal. I mean, it is a lot more important than what you think. All right, do we have the hunting